Thank you very much for joining us, everybody. And my name's Pat Stebbings. I work as a Development Officer for Moch Cymru, and we're very pleased to welcome Julie Thomas here today from Simply the Best Training Consultancy. And Julie is going to tell us all about the importance of controlling rodents, which is something that we all have to think about if we've got livestock and buildings. So if you would like, any of the people participating in the webinar would like to ask questions, you can put them in the chat at the bottom of the screen, and I'll ask Julie for you, and you can do that at any time during the webinar, and I'll put the questions to Julie. And so that's, I think, all I need to say at the beginning. So I'll hand over to Julie to start the webinar.
Okay, thank you very much, Pat, and welcome to everyone. I'm going to show you a set of slides. I am quite used to taking questions as we go along in a course, and of course this isn't like that. So anything you've got to ask, we can do a question and answer session at the end. So I'll start to share the screen now, and let's go there. And is that okay? Everyone can see the title slide there? Yes. Yeah. So yeah. Pat, you're nodding. Yeah. So yes, here we go. So we're going to call this rodent control on pig farms. An awful lot of it, though, will apply to standard livestock farms, cattle, sheep, etc. But we're bringing in a definite sort of emphasis on what it is on a pig farm tonight. So here we go. We've got a course called Control of Commensal Rodents. And when I heard first about commensal rodents, it struck me, what on earth does that mean? Because I've never heard the term before. I don't know if you've come across it, but it's what you see everywhere when they start to talk about rodent control. What is a commensal rodent? And the actual meaning is commensal, it eats at man's table. Now, rats and mice are described as commensal rodents because for centuries they have evolved and adapted, and now they only live with man. Now it's quite surprising because we know that rats and mice are covered under wildlife legislation and all the rest of it. We know they're pests as well, but the terminology, this commensal, it comes from the Latin mensa, was table, because over the years they have followed us everywhere. They followed us around the globe. Wherever there's man, there are rats and there are mice, and that continues to be the way. If you went into the middle of the wildest places in Dartmoor or up in the Elan Valley, you would not find rats and mice living unattached to man and his dwellings. So that's why we term them commensal rodents. Now, let's go on to the next slide. The ones that we're talking about, the main one, the main rat you know and you'll have seen is the Norway common or brown rat. It's called all three things, but it's the one rat. There is a ship rat or a black rat, much rarer. They tend to be only in dockyards, and they're just slightly smaller and are black in colour. However, exactly the same stuff applies to them. And then the mouse that we're talking about is the house mouse. And again, the clues in the title, it lives with man. Now then, what are the reasons that we have to look at controlling rodents, these commensal rodents? There are 6 key reasons, really. And we're going to look at all of these in turn. The first is disease, the diseases they can carry. Secondly, which is very important, food losses and contamination that they can cause. Then we've got a separate issue of the damage to structures, cables, pipes, and buildings that they can cause, including fire risks. Then this is more really perhaps for direct food businesses, They could have a loss of business and or reputation. You're not really going to go into a cafe which was got a rent-to-kill van parked outside, are you? So there's a lot of that for, if you like, tourist industry and food industry. You've also got legal responsibilities as a business to control rodents. And the last one is the nuisance value. I don't think any of us really like them, do we? So 6 very good reasons there for why we need to control rodents. Now, the first one, that is the diseases. Rats carry diseases, and probably the most famous one that you know about is the Black Death, and that was caused by rat fleas. And luckily we don't have the Black Death around anymore, but we do have these rats as vectors for certain diseases. And one of the main ones is called leptospirosis, which is also called Weil's disease. We've also got salmonella, another food poisoning bacteria, toxoplasmosis, which you've heard of, and again, that can cause abortion. Then bubonic plague, and a few others as well that are not so common. But certainly those main ones there in bold are the ones that we need to be wary of and be aware that the rats can cause this. Now, Weil's disease is probably the most important one to think of, and it's called leptospirosis. And wherever there's water and there are rats, you have a danger of catching this. Now, I don't know if any of you remember the comedian Paul Williams. He did a charity swim in the River Thames a couple of years ago in a wetsuit, but he actually contracted Weil's disease and was seriously ill for about 6 months. It can be quite a debilitating disease. Now, there's about 50 cases of leptospirosis occur in a year, 1 a week. And guess what? The majority of those cases are in farmers. And the reason for that, of course, is we're an industry that doesn't wear gloves as routine. Now, other people that would be classed as in danger of Weil's disease would be like water authority people, people who work in sewage treatment plants, or anywhere where there is a likelihood of rat infestation. And of course, in those situations, they'll be wearing PPE. Whereas farmers, we're farmers, and we tend not to be very careful with wearing gloves. But if you've got damp and you've got rats, you do have a risk of leptospirosis. Salmonella, toxoplasmosis, again, very important diseases, bacterial diseases that can be very serious. Toxoplasmosis, of course, can cause abortions as well. Now, I mentioned the fact that we are an industry that doesn't use gloves. We've all been in this situation, had a look in the water trough, found that the valve is stuck. What do? We whoosh our hands around, pull out the stuff and the mess, and then we wipe our hands on our overalls. And that possibly is one of the reasons that leptospirosis, you do find that occurring on farms. Now, the next thing after disease is the food losses and contamination. And wherever food is, rats or mice may be present, and they can therefore contaminate that feedstuff, which is going to be eaten by pigs or cattle or anything else. They can contaminate it via urine, via their droppings, their fur, their body oils, and dirt or bacteria carried on their paws. Now, they can contaminate an awful lot more, and the damage often exceeds the amount eaten, as they may nibble many different items of food. Classically, in warehouses, a pallet of chocolate could be attacked just on one corner by mice, but in fact, the whole pallet then would have to be discarded. So food losses and contamination is a big worry. Structural damage. This is caused by rodents. They can undermine foundations. They can literally go through concrete. Electrical equipment, they can cause power failure. And machinery, this is becoming a really big issue these days. And it can create, machinery failure and could possibly void any warranty on that. Fire risk, if they're gnawing through cables, then of course you've got a fire risk as well in buildings. And this is what they estimate to be the cost of activity of rats and mice on a farm in the UK, between 14 to 28 million for the UK. Now, 14 to 28, that's a fair old, bit of money, but it's rising. And it's rising because of the damage these days to a lot of machinery, which has got mechanical looms in it and electrical looms. And that is becoming a big problem. Now, in pig production, I know this is in more of the intensive pig production, but looking at a lot of the larger pig production places and the pig production firms, they reckon it's the averaging out at about £6 per pig they slaughter. £6 is what is lost to the industry through the activities of rodents. Pretty significant. These days, I mentioned about balers and machinery. My son's an engineer. He was called out 2 years ago, summer 2 years ago, to many balers. Every baler that he went out to sort had rodent damage. It's a wonderful place for them to live in. It's nice and warm, and they eat through all of the wiring. Now, when you had mechanical balers, of course, with just, mechanical moving parts, that didn't happen. It does now. So it's becoming a really big area of concern. Now then, another thing about pig production is that we do have a heightened risk within pig production than we do in other livestock sectors. Pigs are omnivorous. They will eat meat and vegetable material, so they can consume dead and dying rodents. Now, you don't have that problem with cattle and sheep because they only eat grass. They can eat contaminated feed, but they will not eat the rats, dead or dying rodents themselves. Pigs will. So that gives us an extra reason for making sure that we are very, very careful with our rodents on a pig farm. The risk is heightened from, first of all, the diseases that rats may carry. But if you do use poison, that is a rodenticide, and we'll talk a little about those later, if that's used on site, there's a danger of contamination of the poison itself in the pig tissues. And it's what we call primary or secondary poisoning, which doesn't happen so much with other livestock. So for pig producers then, rodents must be controlled, and outdoor pig production and indoor pig production will bring different challenges. But rodenticide use should always be a last resort. That is that last sort of thing in your armory to control them. So how did we get here then? How did we get to this situation where you have to have a certificate in order to buy rodenticide, and why we're looking more carefully now at issues around rodent control? Well, I always talk about yesteryear, and I'm very, very old. So when I was a little girl, I do remember on my Nine and Tides farm, I remember owls being there as regular visitors. I remember too the granary steps. We've got a picture here of an old set of granary steps, because farmers in the olden days, yesteryear, used to take the grain upstairs to make it less easy for rodents. And we always had holes in the walls to let the owls and natural predators in. So in the old days, it was very much a natural thing happened, and control was relatively simple, much smaller quantities. Then what happened, of course, we developed big open sheds, large span sheds, open fronted. We've then gone into mechanical handling of all sorts of materials. And that really was an invitation for rats to join us. And the rats just poured in. And then, of course, we got this stuff, rat bait or rat poison. And we chucked it about everywhere. And we used it, and it was great, and it killed the rats. But it's left us with a big, dreadful legacy. We've got resistance within rodent species, which is very complex. We will mention it later, but that is an issue that we need to think about. Any further resistance, we can't really cope with. And today really is the last chance saloon. If we don't use rodenticides responsibly now, they will be banned. And it's come to that government and manufacturers had to come to an agreement, or they would have been banned outright. They've been banned already in Scandinavia, and they're banned in Germany only by use by professional pest control users. And the solution that the manufacturers have come up with is the adoption of what we call the CREW code, the Campaign for Responsible Rodenticide Use, and farmers have now become what we call professional users. Okay, now with this new legislation that's come in, the CREW code was introduced in 2013, and I've just realized I got two U's there, not two R's, and I shouldn't have. But the CREW code was voluntary. In 2017, it was required that you had to have a certificate that you'd been on a course in order to purchase rodenticide. And in 2021, quite recently, the CREW code has become an approved code of practice, or what we call an ACOP, right? Approved code of practice. So it is now legislative. And that is a big change. The reason that these things have come in is because 65% of all rat poison sales in the UK is in farming. Right? We're the biggest users of it. And what is a rodenticide? It's a chemical, and it's usually an anticoagulant, and it acts by disrupting their blood clotting, and the rats or mice die from internal bleeding. That's what rodenticides are. The problem has been is rodenticides are toxic to all mammals and birds, and because of its use during the sort of the 80s, 70s and 80s, what we found is that there are so many animals now that are carrying these rodenticide residues in their tissues. And in many cases, it's enough to kill the individual animals, but it's caused an absolute decimation in the natural populations, particularly of birds of prey. And in fact, when you consider that one barn owl can eat 1,000 rodents in a year, that gives you an idea of the problem. Once these rodents were poisoned, these animals were picking up the bodies or the dead or dying rodents with it in, and it is now right through the chain. So this has to stop. And this is why we have to have what we call responsible use. When you look at using rodenticides, we call them target and non-target species. And the target species are commensal rodents, and the non-target is anything else. Now, for children and vulnerable people, we certainly don't want them eating rat poison. So there is an item in it called Bitrex, which makes the poison taste very bitter. It's designed that if a child eats into it, they should spit it out. But however, it doesn't work sometimes if it's a very greedy Labrador. They just pile in and eat a lot of it. So we have to be very careful about non-target species. Because Bitrex will not always deter pets. It doesn't deter rats or mice. They can't taste it, but it's only rodents that can't taste it. So restricting access is the main control. We talk about primary poisoning, where a non-target species eats the bait. Now, in your situation, this could be a pig actually eating the bait. You should never have bait out that's loose and spilt. But if the animals get access to bait, they can have what we call primary poisoning. And then when you have non-target species eating dead and dying rodents, then that's called secondary poisoning. And both of these can happen quite easily within the pig sector, particularly this secondary, because they're omnivorous. So rats and mice then have always been bad news, and we refer to them as pest species, and we know that the control is legal. for them. So let's have a look at them and what I call meet the enemy. So let's have a look at what they look like. Here's the rat, and you can see there all of these characteristics. You've probably all seen a rat. There's a mouse. They actually look quite cute, but they are different, very different in how they appear to rats. Obviously smaller, but actually an adolescent rat looks very much the size of a small mouse. So you do need to know the difference between them. This sort of thing we go into in much more detail on the full course, but let's have a look at what a rodent is. And that's what its skull looks like. And it has got a big gap called a diastema in its jaws there. And now a squirrel has that. And a squirrel is much the same. You all know about a squirrel putting nuts in to store to take away to their nest. Rats can do the same. Now, the interesting thing about rodent dentition, or their teeth, is that they never stop growing through the life of the animal. So the rodent, it means gnawing. They have to perform a workout to control the growth of their teeth. Now, they're very clever things, these rodents, because what they do is they throw their tongue to the back of their throat and exercise by gnawing on things with their teeth to control the teeth growth. And they're not actually eating that. So when they're gnawing something, they're like a little wood chipper. They're spitting it all out of the side of their mouth. And that's the gnawing, what I call the workout, that defines rodents. Anything can be gnawed. They're not eating it. When they're eating, the tongue comes to the front and they eat food. But when they're chewing this stuff, they're not eating it. They're spitting it out to the side. And knowing that can help a lot in the way that we're looking to control them. Now, rodents have got a certain amount of things that are essential for life. And one is a suitable food source, access to water. That's only important for rats. Mice can live virtually without water. There's enough in their food, but rats have to have access to water. Good harbourage, that word harbourage means somewhere to live. So a perfect rat house is a lovely overgrown area where they're safe. Harbourage means that they can be safe and not seen by birds of prey. Favourable temperatures, and then they need a mate. And once they got all of those things, this happens. Well, mating happens. So the key to control really is to try and disrupt these perfect conditions. Now, food, very difficult to isolate completely food on a farm. Water, there's always puddles and water about. And temperature, well, it is what it is. But harbourage, somewhere to hide, that's a good place to start. And we'll look at that a little bit later on. But if all those good conditions exist, they breed. And I think you'll find the next slide very interesting. Let's have a look here at a mature rodent. Let's say it's a rat. The female comes into estrus and mating occurs. Now, once they mated, pregnancy lasts for about 21 days for both rats and mice. So the female will then give birth. The minute she gives birth, she has a postpartum estrus. So she cycles straight away and mates again. And so she is now pregnant again. So each female, once they give birth, they will have those little ones suckling on them for 21 days. They will be weaned. They'll give birth again. So it is an absolute reproductive machine, right? Every 21 days, there's a litter. And then that litter is weaned. It becomes mature itself in 5 to 6 weeks, has an estrus, mates itself. So it really is, a fantastic breeding capability. And this is a good one. Stopping one mouse does a lot. If you've got one pregnant mouse on the 1st of January, potentially you've got 4,500 mice by December, right? Makes you think, doesn't it? It's what you call exponential growth. Now, this is the sort of formal graph. And you can see here that we've got the number of weeks going up the side here and number of rodents from one breeding pair. So it is going up really, really steeply on this last bit. Now, what I found surprising was that when I spoke to people in the pest control industry, I said, well, it's virtually impossible then to control a population. And they all said, oh, yes, it is. If you're always working here, and once you've got your population down to a very minimum, it's very easy to control, very easy. But the problem is that particularly us on farms, we don't do anything about it till here. And then it's too late because we've got a really big infestation. And because it's here, it's the only time that you begin to see signs that you have got a problem. This is when you see rats. You see a lot of signs of rats. You see a lot of droppings, all of those things. It's too late. So it's down here we need to concentrate, and then we can have really good effective control on our rodent population. And as farmers, use your stock skills to make sure that you know when there's the smallest amount of activity, because that's the best time to act and get rid of them. Rats and mice themselves are actually chalk and cheese. They're very, very different in their behavior and in their activities. So let's have a look at the differences between them then. And let's look at rats first of all. They're omnivorous. They'll eat meat and vegetable matter. They need to eat about 25 grams per day, about 10% of their body weight. And they will hoard food. You've seen that skull and that gap in their teeth in their mouth, that in the diastema. So they will hoard food and take it back to the burrow. They consume larger quantities in one sitting than a mouse. They have very predictable feeding behavior, so we can use this against them. They're also something, big word here, called neophobic. And neophobic means they hate anything new. So rats are creatures of habit. If they come out of their burrow and turn right, they will always turn right. And rats work on very, very defined patterns and places to run. We've all heard the term rat runs. So they are neophobic. If you put anything new in front of them, they will turn back and go back because it's new. They don't like it, which is why it's not a very good idea actually to use these bright black plastic bait boxes that everybody's so keen on, because rats will just look at it and go, whoa, no way. So they hate anything new. They've also got something called kinesthetic muscle memory, which means they remember where they've been. Rats traditionally will run across the ground, always against a wall if they can. They like to have two planes, you know, they like to have their side against a wall and their base on the floor. That way it makes them very, very difficult to predate from the air. So birds can't get to them. And they have this kinesthetic muscle memory. They remember where they go. They come out, they turn left, they turn right. They use the same rat runs all the time. Now, an urban rat will only go about 50 meters for food, but a rural rat, much fitter, and will go up to about 600 meters. So quite a big difference there in the areas that they forage in. Now, if we look at a house mouse, then they're omnivorous too, and they need 20% of their body weight per day, 3 to 4 grams per day an adult house mouse will eat. They will survive in numbers on poor diets, and they have very sporadic feeding behavior, totally unpredictable. Again, we can use this against them when we come to looking at controlling them. They will go up to 30 feeding sites per night. So they come out and they're everywhere. They will look here, look there, and they will readily investigate new objects, entirely different to rats. So put something out new and they, oh, what's this? What's this? Well, let's have a look at it. Completely different. Now, mice also have a tendency to avoid baiting stations following a bad experience. And we call this bait shyness. And we see this in mice far more than we will ever see in a colony of rats. Now, it's a bit like, I suppose, if you've gone and had a takeaway somewhere and had a bad stomach the following day, you think, oh, I'm not going to that takeaway again. And mice seem to get this. If they eat a little bit of bait, it seems to upset them. They haven't eaten enough to kill them, but they think, oh, I'm not touching that stuff again. So you do get this bait shyness that happens with them. And within a mouse colony, you will always have one dominant male. So there will be groups of mice, but one dominant male will exist in a place and he will have control over those. With rats, they're much more in family groups and much more sort of indiscriminate mating. So there they are, very, very different. Now then, did I have, oh, there we are. That's a picture, if you've never seen them, that's mice droppings in comparison to rice, in comparison to rat droppings. So that's what you're looking for, because if you've got those, then you've got mice and rats. A rat will produce about 40 droppings a day. This gives the professional pest controllers tend to use, you know, a sort of a rough idea of how many droppings there are in order to control them. And rats also use latrine. So they are very clean creatures, really, because they will always avoid going near their food. So they will have a special area that they use just for latrines. This is typical examples of what you'd find with droppings, and that droppings will give you a good idea of the size of the infestation. Oh, sorry, went one slide too far then. Hang on a minute. Rats also will live in burrows. Mice don't. Mice will live in the fabric of the building. They don't need anything special. They just live at different heights in the fabric of the building. Rats like to burrow. They'll burrow into muck heaps. They'll burrow into banks. And this is really where they want to lie up. They like to rear their young there. And that's when they rest during the day when you don't see them. Because of course they're out in the night. Sorry about this. Here we are. And of course, when they're in the burrow, they're escaping from predators. So that's why they like to burrow. And that is what a rat burrow typically would look like. You'd have an entrance to a nest area, and then you'll have bolt holes that they will use to escape. So a series of tunnels and burrows is what you'll find. That's where you'll find the rats are living, usually outside, usually near sheds. Now, something else that you might not have seen before, I've seen these, but I never knew what they were. I don't know if you can see that little triangle. It's almost like a little pyramid there. I'm putting my mouse around the outside of it. That is dust. Because mice don't need much water, their urine is almost solid. It is liquid, but it dries out very quickly, and it leaves behind this pillar of like dust. You can see this is in a pig factory, and those are used to mark territories. These dominant males use that to mark their territories. So urine pillars you will find, and you can see from this pig farm, it's got quite a lot of mice. You can also look for smear marks. Grease and dirt on the fur of rats will rub off against continually used roots or runs. And here we can see a typical shed roof, and you can see here the grease marks of where the rat is coming down to go underneath there, down there, and down there. That would give you a good indication that that is a regular rat run. Same here on a feed bin. You can see the grease marks. You can see the grease marks there. You know that mouse or rat is having to go round the corner. So that, of course, would be the best place to put your traps. And I don't know if anybody's seen this before on concrete walls, on breeze block walls, but that is the grease and smear marks from rats running over big bales. Big bales against the wall, and those are classic grease and smear marks that will tell you that you've got a rat infestation. This too, you might not see these slides very well. Mice only need a 5mm gap to get into places. Now, 5mm is about the size of the nib of a pen. So they can get in terrific places. And rats, 10mm. And this slide here shows a 5mm gap here. There's the mouse. There's the mouse going through the 5mm gap. And there's his tail after he's gone through. So they really are, you know, proofing against mice is very difficult. Proofing against rats is a little easier. What rats tend to do is they'll find a small gap and then they will make it bigger. They will gnaw at it to give it its gnawing workout, but it will also make a bigger hole so that they can run through it more quickly. So they will tend to do that. Mice can get through anyway. Now then, rodent movements. When are you going to find them? Well, when you're in bed. That's when they come out. The greatest activity is leading up to late evening, up to midnight. And again, once dawn comes, they're back in their burrows. So you don't see them. And this is a lot of the problems. We don't see them out active. If you do see rodents during the day, it may be that the colony has either lost its fear of people or that it's so large that there are a lot of hungry rats and they have to come out in the day when it's less safe in order to feed. So that's when they're up, when we are usually tucked up in bed. Classically, this is what you'd find in an attic. There's a rat there, he's in a trap, but you can see lots of droppings, lots of staining, chewed wires, classically rat presence there. Again, on a farm, we mentioned that rats like water. You've got here, you know, a drainage gutter on the top of a shed. There it is in the daytime. That is the same thing in the night. And these days, cameras are a very good way of being able to check on rodent presence where they are, because of course, those cameras have become so cheap now, the little sort of trail cameras, GoPro type cameras. But yeah, quite amazing, isn't it? The activity there in the night. So now I think we know a little bit more about our enemy than we did before. And so now... I couldn't quite hear you. Could you please repeat what you said? So I'm not sure. Did you hear that? I don't know what that means. If you like. Oh, sorry about that, folks. Something just started that it shouldn't. Right. So now we know the enemy, we can begin a planned approach. And so I would say when you walk into a shed, you are generally looking for food, bedding and water for stock. We check signs of health. We observe behavior. Do the same thing now in your sheds, looking for rats and mice activity. And it's just using those same skills. Something to think about. Do you want to buy rodenticide? In which case you'll need to go in the training course to do it. Or do you want to control rodents? Because really you can look at controlling a lot of rodent problems through what we call integrated pest management or environmental control, rather than go down the line of the rodenticides. And the course that you want is available through Farming Connect. It covers integrated pest management, but it also covers rodenticide, which allows you to purchase it. But as I say, it should always be the last resort. And really what we need to be looking at when you go home tonight, well, you're probably at home because you're watching this, but do a little survey and ensure your locations are as unfriendly to rodents as possible. And by that, I mean remove clutter in the environment, clear scrub vegetation. The less harbourage they have, the less places to live, the harder you make it for them. And in some cases, proofing buildings to prevent access. I know that not always be done, but you know, you can try. This is classically rodent friendly, and we've all got a shed like this on the farm where somebody says, where should I put this? Or around the back of the shed. So you don't want it out, you know, looking a mess. So you put it around the back of the shed. And what that gives them is a fantastic harbourage, a place to live. There we are again. They're as happy as anything in there because there's no birds can get at them, no birds of prey, and they can just happily move around there. Nothing can get at them. Cats can't get at them. Terriers can't get at them. So the messier it is, the better the rodents like it. Other things you can do is think about proofing. And I'll just show you another slide now. This is the sort of thing you find in hospitals, but it's broken. So rodents can just come straight in. Wire wool. Wire wool stuffed into holes is very, very good because they can't gnaw through wire wool because, of course, it will cut their mouth. And so that is a very good thing to use and cheap, easy to try and clog up holes that you don't want them coming in through. Proofing, if you've got an old door like this and you've got, you know, meal in there or dog food or something like that, it's an open invitation. And you can't always do anything, but if you can proof it as best you can, at least they can go on to the next shed. So anywhere that you're keeping food, you need to be looking at as a sort of priority. There again, classic, behind a shed. So where shall I put it? Just chuck it behind the shed for now. And what you've done there is created a fantastic living quarters, and they can just come into the sheds, both sides, each night for feed. They contaminate feedstuffs and all of the rest of it. So keeping it clean does work well. That might look a little sort of extreme to you. It's very, very clean. A rat looking at that will think, hang on, I don't think I'm going to go there. They will really think twice about certainly being in the open on a place like that. And they're not even comfortable running up the wall of a place like that. So sometimes the greater expanse of nothing you can have, it's amazing how it will deter rodents and rodent activity. They'll always go for the easy option. Nothing wrong with that control. A cat is very patient, and a cat has often been, you know, is a good one to control pests, and also terriers. They're good to control, also good to mark or detect and to tell you, you know, where they are. The problem you get with using rodenticide, one of the big problems in the past has been getting resistance. And it's a very complex area, and we caused it ourselves by doing something that we call sublethal baiting. And years ago, when rodenticides were in their infancy, what we did was we never got you've all seen these things, you know, you knock it on there and it goes up and hits the bell. We never got to the lethal dose to kill them. So what we did was kept baiting them, and they were going up and down with the toxics inside them. And eventually it was just a typical genetic alteration, and they became resistant. If you are looking at rodenticides, and you'll see plenty like this, trade names mean nothing. You need to know the active ingredient. There are 5 active ingredients available. All of them can lead, if they're not used properly, lead to resistance. Now, whatever poison you use, then it will be at least 2 to 4 days after eating a lethal dose before the effects are felt. A rat will take 3 to 7 days to die once he's eaten that lethal dose. And that is the same for every one of the 5 poisons you can get. All right. So whatever you're using, they have the lethal dose, but they will still take time to die. And that is important to remember. And that's something that we look at in the course in depth. So this sublethal dosing is what we're trying to avoid. We want to get them to a lethal dose quickly and then allow them to die quickly. Right, that is the idea of it. So mission impossible? Well, it might be, but generally, when you talk to a pest control, we spoke to many people when we first looked into this, it is possible to minimize rodent control depending on your circumstances. If you're an isolated farm, it's something you can really get a handle on. If you're close to other properties, it's much more difficult, and perhaps that's time to look at what we call integrated pest management and have a proper strategy in place. So I hope I've given you plenty to think about there and introduced you to our enemy, rats and mice, and given you a little bit to think about. Trapping is effective, shooting is effective, natural pest control is effective, rodenticides are effective, but just keep rodenticides till last. And as I say, if you want to know more, integrated pest management is the way to go. If you look up the crew code, and that is CRRU, not like I had on my slides, sorry, the campaign for responsible rodenticide use, you will find the new crew code, and that will give you plenty more information about how you can use rodenticides, but it won't give you enough on the different poisons and things that are available. So with that now, I think I'll hand back to Pat. Do you want me to stop sharing, Pat, or?
Yes, please, and then we can see your
then
face.
You can, right, okay, there we go.
I'll put my face on as well. Well, right. Thank you very much for that. It makes me creep just looking at all those rats.
Sorry about that.
I don't know if anyone's got any questions. We have had one come in so far. So can you say something about humane trapping of rats? So I've caught a trap. I've caught a rat in my cage trap.
Right.
What am I allowed to do with that, and what am I not allowed to do with that rat?
Right. You are allowed to kill it humanely, humane dispatch, which practically really means using an air rifle. An air rifle is acceptable. Also, hitting it once on the back of the head to kill it instantly. Now that's more difficult, but it is allowed. What you must not do is drown, stamp, beat, mutilate, asphyxiate, or use explosives. That's what the law says. They've added in explosives now. I'm not sure about that. But you cannot stamp, beat, mutilate, stab. Did I mention stab? It has to be one hit at the back of the head or an air rifle.
Can you take it and let it loose somewhere else?
You could, but it's probably the most cruel thing you could do, because if you release it, first of all, it'll come back home. If you don't release it far enough, it will be straight back. And because rats live in families and colonies, if you drove 5 miles and let it loose, it would be killed by other rats or something else trying to find its way back, or starve. So it's not a humane option. No.
Yes, and you can't just let the dog open the cage and let the dog have it, presumably.
Because the potential is it could get away.
Yeah.
It
so
wouldn't be.
You've got to humanely kill it.
Humanely kill
it. If you trap one.
Immediate dispatch. Actually, when you catch it in a cage, you then take on the welfare. So live traps must be inspected regularly, certainly within 24 hours, and that the welfare of that animal is your responsibility. So if you're going to keep it for a day or two for somebody to kill for you, you would need to feed it and give it water. Yeah.
Yeah. What about if I've got a trap and I've managed to get one and it's a lethal trap? What do I do with the body?
If you're not using rodenticides, you don't have any issues because there is no poison in that rat. It only, if you catch it in a trap and it's a break-back track and it's dead, you don't have a disposal issue.
If it has got rodenticide in it, what do I do with it then?
You read what it says on the back of the bucket of the poison you bought, and it's always dispose of as per manufacturer's instructions, because the potential is for that dead rodent to get out there into the food chain. Yeah.
I see. We had that was one of the questions that came in. What do I do with a dispose of a dead rat? So it depends on how it's been killed.
Yeah. If you're only using traps and you are confident that you haven't got a sort of place next to you that's using rodenticide, if you are confident it's only traps, then that body is fine because it doesn't have any rodenticide in it. But if you've been using rodenticide, then it's a different ball game. You have to use the disposal as per manufacturer's instructions on the bucket. It used to be you could double bag and bin it, but that has changed.
You used to double bag and bin it?
In the bin, domestic rubbish.
For then to go to a rubbish tip and get eaten by... That's not very clever, is it?
No, it wasn't very clever. That's why they stopped it.
It's a mystery, really. You've just got to read what it says on the manufacturers.
Yes.
So you can't advise any further.
Now, if you, again, when you go on the course, we talk about these issues, and you can do something such as burrow baiting, where literally the rodent will die in his nest with the poison, in which case he's underground. You can heal the burrow in, and that is where it remains. You wouldn't be expected to retrieve it then.
Is it likely that if you are putting poison down for rats and they eat the poison, is it more than likely that they will go back to their burrows to die? Or do they generally die, or are they likely to die on the surface where they can be taken by other predators?
Their natural instinct would be to go to their burrow, because they'll be out at night feeding. If they've taken a lethal dose, they go back to their burrow in the day. They will still take 3 days to die, though, 3 to 4 days to die. So they'll be back out feeding again. So the potential is always there for dogs, cats, wild birds to predate on them and therefore get it into their system as well. But they often do go to ground to die. Sometimes you'll find them out dead, but they'll often be a little bit groggy as well on their final day. But
so that poses a risk that something could eat them.
Yes.
A bird.
Yes. Yeah, and this is the problem with pig production. Of course,
pigs could eat them.
Pigs will eat them, and you have to be very, very careful.
So this is a question that you may not have the answer to, because I've just thought of this. How much rat poison would a pig have to eat before it was itself died?
It depends. It would be a fair whack. It would be a fair amount, but each poison has a different action. Well, they all act as an anticoagulant, but they all have different tolerances for all the different species. Chickens, pigs, dogs, cats, all have different tolerances to the 5 different poisons. And it is a bit of a minefield.
So if people... how do people that might be listening to this and would like to learn more about the rodenticide and the integrated management system for rats, rodents, how would they go about getting onto a course?
Well, through Farming Connect. They are 80% funded through Farming Connect. That would probably be the best, sort of course of action to get that done. You can find plenty of information online, but probably not quite enough. The crew code itself is online, and it does deal with a lot of issues around baiting, but the course itself does give you a very good insight. It allows you to be able to adapt all of the legal things and the legislation to your own circumstances. And I think that's important. We're a farm that is very isolated. Therefore, it's relatively easy for us to have good rodent control. But once you've got a lot of places around you, you can get rats coming in from other premises. You know, if you're a farmyard near and you have neighbours around your farmyard, things can get a lot more complex. So you've got to really think it out through and come up with a strategy of integrated pest management that suits your farm. I do know that one farm I spoke to, there was a pig farm right next to a poultry farm. Ooh. And they were getting a lot of problems when the chicken sheds were emptied out, you know, for the 6 weeks. And the rodents from the empty chicken sheds going up to the piggery at that time, sort of what they call immigration. And they ended up working together to control the populations. They did use a professional pest controller for that. It was a big intensive place, but they worked together in order to solve the problem for both then. And there's the potential for that, yeah.
Oh, well, has anybody else got any questions that they'd like to ask Julie about rodents? Everybody's going to be going outside with a torch and having a look now to see how many they've got.
What? Yeah, yeah. Well, actually, a lot of people have been quite surprised with calving cameras and lambing cameras. You know, they've been using those more and more now, and it's surprising then how many you do see in the sheep shed and the cattle shed at night.
Lovely.
Yeah.
Oh, well.
Yeah.
Oh, so we haven't got any more questions, I don't think. Well, what we'll do now then is we'll say thank you to Julie very much. And if we...
I think I've got a question here I've just seen.
Oh, right, yes.
Are rivers on farms a problem? Right, that's from Andrew. Just quickly, yes, if you've got rats. Again, it depends, but if you've got holes in the side of the riverbank, do watch, but be very careful you haven't got water voles, because water voles look like rats, but they are a protected species. So if you have got rivers on farms, you need to always suspect you might have water voles, and live trapping would be better, because if you trap a water vole in a live trap, you can release it. So it does depend. You'll have to look at that quite carefully. Right, so.
Good. Right, so the next well, thank you very much. That was really interesting, and I hope that if anybody wants to go on a course and learn more about rodenticides and integrated management of rodents control, then they can either get in touch with Mentor Moch, Cymru, or Julie, Simply the Best Training, and you can get advice on that. For our next webinar for Mentor Moch, we've got Forest Coalpit Farm, who did a growth trial with their pigs, and that is in November. Kyle, which date in November is it? I think it's the 18th. Kyle might answer that question now. So if anyone wants to, it's in conjunction with Farming Connect, that. Anyone who wants to go in and see what Kyle's been up to, that's a good thing. And then we've also got the, which we want to promote, the health planning funding for pigs, and also the bespoke branding, which you can get £750 worth of branding for your own use. So if you haven't already applied for that, or if you have thought about it and haven't got around to returning the information to me, then I would quite like to hear from you all. And I think we're going to put a feedback questionnaire, which has now appeared in the chat. So if you could take a minute of time and click on that link and fill in the evaluation form, we would be very, very grateful, because we need to have the evaluation to justify future webinars. So I think that's it. Thank you very much, Julie.
Welcome.
And thank you very much, everybody, for coming to this meeting. And we'll see you all again soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.